everyone, this is Helen Chow here. For those of you who've been following my podcast, Smart Career Planning, you know that I've been speaking with various professionals about their career transition journey. And today I have a very special guest. His name is Adam Hesh. He spent about 11 years, if not maybe a little bit more than 11 years in the military, and he has a very successful career transition into the corporate world. For those of you who've spent time and served in the military, you know how similar the work is from in the military and versus the corporate world. You know the similarities. However, for those like me who is a recruiter and I'm trained to look at the exact job title and even similar experience, like I need to see the language. So for people who were in the military or still are in the military and hoping to transition, it can feel very daunting to understand that language and how to articulate it, despite the fact that there's some similarities. So that's why I'm really excited about Adam coming on and talk with us. So without further ado, I'm just going to shut up and have him come on and talk about and share with us his journey.
Hi everyone, welcome to Smart Career Planning, and I'm really excited to have our guest Adam to come on and speak with us today. He served in the military for 11 years and now he's working for Facebook. It's quite a bit of a jump, so I would love for him to talk about his journey, how he got himself from military to Facebook. Hi Adam.
Hi Helen, good to see you.
Good seeing you too. So from our initial conversation, I know that you did a lot of different things in the military, including mastering a foreign language, to logistics, to chasing drug traffickers in the Caribbean. Out of everything you've learned, which skill sets did you find most useful as a civilian, and how did you discover those? How did you find those skills being transferable, or how did you transfer those skills in your current role?
Sure. I think probably the soft skills that you learn in the military are most useful for transferring. Mm-hmm. Not a lot of veterans. I guess I'm kind of tech biased since I moved to Silicon Valley, so I can speak most to how veterans offer value to the world of tech. A few veterans are out there learning to code, but from day one as a veteran, you show up and you meet people from all walks of life. In a large organization, you have to learn how to get along with them to collaborate as a team. There's a misunderstanding that when you join the military, someone gives you orders and you do what they say automatically. There's so much more ambiguity and uncertainty and negotiation involved, especially when you're working with your peers of the same rank. So I think roles like sales, account executive, customer success, customer advocate are really good fits for veterans coming out because they're used to working on a problem together and asking for help from other teams who might have skills different than theirs. So anything like that. Security is also a natural fit, physical security. I work in physical security at Facebook. Mm-hmm. The job skills required there are very similar as well for incident response, crisis management, certain level of diplomacy, stuff like that. So those are two kind of the areas that I see. A third option might be for larger startups, maybe 200 people or more, mid-level managers. You don't have to be an expert, but you do have to be an expert at leveraging talented people. I think that's where veterans can plug into immediately, because often you find yourself in charge of someone who's very technically skilled, and you need to put them where they do their best work on the best team.
Mm-hmm. But how about the actual transition from the military, which is really strict, there's a lot of hierarchy, to a corporate world where it's a little bit more challenging to navigate within the corporate structure? How did you see yourself transitioning and even getting used to such a different environment?
Yeah, I think, like I said earlier, I think the military is less regimented than people might believe if you were to explore it and check it out. So most veterans are comfortable working in, I guess the buzzword is a matrix organization, mm-hmm. where it's not necessarily hierarchical, but you're working to negotiate a solution, especially for combat veterans who have to plan a mission and execute extremely quickly. You can't always let rank get in the way of that process. So I think the biggest barrier to entry into the transition is simply a function of language. The military and government have so many acronyms and so many ways of describing what they do. If you go into an interview using the same language you use in the service after 5 minutes, your interviewer is going to be immediately lost or bored or frustrated, and they're going to say, really, thank you, appreciate your time, you're probably not a good fit, which is a shame because a veteran might, in fact, be a good fit. Mm-hmm. I might have gone a little overboard, but I did really deep research before I moved into the world of tech and built a 10-tab spreadsheet analyzing every data point that I could find with 200 different startups. And again, maybe that's a bit much, but the way you use language is so, so important. And it's interesting to me that sometimes that's lost on veterans, probably because transitioning industries can seem different than traveling to a foreign country. But when you travel to a foreign country, depending on what your unit you're in, you go through an extensive amount of training on their cultural norms, their language, what certain clothing means. A lot of people don't know that the bottom of a shoe in the Middle East is highly offensive. We don't think that in America. So those cultural nuances matter so much in earning the respect and getting someone to listen to you overseas. And the exact same thing is true. If you drop into Silicon Valley from the military and you know what a startup is, you know who Paul Graham is, you know what Y Combinator is, you can speak intelligently about venture capital and growth and different types of investment, then you will get anyone to be willing to listen to you for 15 minutes. Then you've opened the door to being able to share some of your stories, and that's the first massive step to getting a job.
Now, for me as a headhunter, a lot of times I look at the resume, I look for titles, I look for direct experience. It seems like, so for me, when I'm looking at your military background and say you're applying for a customer success role, I immediately see a disconnect. Would you recommend job seekers to bridge that gap between what a recruiter is looking at and your experience so you can make that transition?
Okay, yeah, I think that's a fantastic question. A few different things. I'll go a little bit out of order because it might make more sense. The first thing that I do when I coach people is I coach them on advanced networking skills. I encourage anyone who applies, I encourage people to never apply to a job unless they've spoken to at least one person in that industry, one person with that job title, and one person at that company. And I will take it as a personal challenge for anyone to tell me that I am not able to achieve that level of access, because I spent 6 months learning everything I could on how to build relationships and meet people. And it's simple stuff that listeners to your podcast are probably already familiar with, but adding value, making introductions, making it easy for them to say yes, having well-researched, intelligent questions to ask them so you're not wasting their time, spending no more than 15 minutes on an introductory call. All of that to get yourself to speak to someone in the organization. So if you're applying to a company you're interested in and you make a really good impression on somebody who has even a little bit of influence, that's your first foot in the door, and that needs to be what you're thinking about before you submit a resume. And so networking is what I come up with first. Second, resume writing. You need to be a little creative with your resume. I think sometimes veterans are used to the structure of documentation in the military. You could fill a library with the amount of technical manuals that you're supposed to follow in the military. And there's probably more structure in our text and our regulations than there is day-to-day, person-to-person. But the text is, so I think a lot of veterans feel like they have no creativity in your resume. You have tremendous creativity in your resume. If you're applying for, most people just think education and experience. I think a resume should say, education, experience as an overview. And then if you're applying for a partnerships role, your resume should have a partnerships section. If you're applying for a project manager role, your resume should have a project manager section. So you need to be very creative with how your resume tells your story quickly. And veterans need to learn, again, how to translate the language of what they do. I'll give you a perfect example of how kind of crazy this can be sometimes. So I was an emergency response officer on a ship. And when I say that, it's immediately understandable. Emergency response, everyone knows what that is. They think FEMA, they think 911, they think fire department. Officer makes sense too. Anybody who holds an office, just like a chief executive officer, that part makes sense. So if I say I'm an emergency response officer, that means that I am someone who holds an office in charge of people who do emergency response. The reason I say all that is that was not my real title. That's what's on my resume. My real title was ADCA, and that stands for Assistant Damage Control Assistant. Yeah, there's two A's in there, and they're both the word assistant, and that doesn't make sense to anyone. And that's for a complicated reason. I don't want to bore your listeners. It has to do with legal responsibility for damage control. But the individual who has legal responsibility has too much on his plate. So over time it got delegated to someone who executed damage control And then on aircraft carriers, that job was so big, he needed an assistant. And I know that sounds crazy, and if you wanted details, I could go into it. Bottom line, you need to rewrite your resume using the language of the job title you're applying to, as long as it directly applies. If you have a job in the military and you've never done anything close to customer service, I could coach someone in very advanced ways where that might be possible. But someone, if they've done customer service-like functions in the military, then they just need to put customer service associate, customer service manager, and they need to be able to tell their story in a way that makes sense to the interviewer, so they can relay how their experience applied directly. The last and final thing is very similar. I interviewed at a catering startup, and they asked me, tell me about your customer-facing experience. Well, in the commercial sense, I've never done anything customer-facing. However, you find the role and you break it into its component parts. Customer-facing probably means you're good at determining a problem. You have empathy to find out the real root of a problem. A second skill you might need is white glove service. You need to be very friendly even with people who get upset easily in order to succeed at de-escalating upset customers. 3, finding a solution. Whether it's someone on your team or doing some research, you need to be able to keep the customer happy and give them manage their expectations on how you can solve their problem, whatever the case may be. So for interviewing veterans, I tell them, find the job title. If you've never held that specific title, you can break down its component of what those skills are. And if you have a story to share on how you've really done well in each of those, then it immediately instills confidence in the interviewer that you're going to be a good fit in that role.
Wow, that's incredible. That is really good.
Yeah, thank you. I really love this job. I mean, I really love giving career coaching, and I learned a lot myself, and it's so satisfying to be able to share that knowledge with other people, because you want to create a win-win situation. You want to create a company that has confidence that this person they're hiring is going to do well. You want the person who's being hired to be confident that this company is be a good fit, so they all win and they can all speak the same language.
Yeah. Now, how about the role of networking? I remember you mentioned something about you just went to various networking events. Do you feel like the role of networking really helps a job seeker transition from one job to the next?
Yes, in so many ways, and I don't want to talk for an hour on that question. I will say this. People need to build a network when they don't need it. It takes energy to ask someone for something. It means a lot to someone to just find a way to add value to them. Whether it's just sharing a funny story at a cocktail party, whether you know someone who they need to meet to increase their bottom line, whether it's something fun that they do. You meet people and you give a positive impression to all of them. You tell them you're going to stay in touch, and then you just build this network of contacts. And then when you need something, they are happy to say yes to what you might need. So the way I would use it in the job search would be asking someone, and it depends on the closeness of that relationship. If you're really close to someone, you can ask for more than if you just met someone. But even people you just met feel awesome if they know they can help you out. So you have to, I give pretty advanced coaching in this area, but things that are useful to ask might be, hey, Donald, had a great connection last week talking about that Vikings game. Just wanted to let you know I'm keeping an eye out for customer service roles. If you happen to come across any you think I'd be a good fit for, please let me know. That's super easy because it's personable and it's easy for them to forward off a link on AngelList. Another thing that you might ask someone for is a resume review. Let's say I met a project manager at Google. We've stayed in touch, had coffee a few times. We have a lot in common. I'll be like, hey, Chris, after a month of job searching, I found the project manager role looks awesome. I found one opening at a startup in San Francisco. Since I know you have project management experience, can I send you my resume for a look over? That's also extremely valuable. Another might be interview practice. You know, hey, Alice, thanks so much for your guidance on cool meetups I should go to back in June. It's been super helpful. Do you have 10 minutes to do interview practice on 2 questions I'm really stuck on for this role? So you want to keep the ask kind of small. You want to do as much research on your own as you can so you're not wasting their time. And then you want to follow up with how they've been helpful to you. So you can leverage your network for every part of the job search, from just looking for a role to writing a resume and cover letter to interviewing. And you use your network or to getting introductions, et cetera, et cetera. So you build your network when you don't need it so people have a good impression of you. Then you use it intelligently. You ask for very specific asks you know they can help you with based on research so that you impress them. and then you keep them posted on the whole process to keep that network strong. Is that helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I'm also sensing a really high level of discipline in a sense. So I'm just going to use my own example. I spent close to a decade in nonprofit, and then I transitioned into a for-profit world. And then I got really stuck trying to figure out what did I do in that decade of being a nonprofit. I didn't have the vernacular. I literally felt like no one should hire me. So as you were describing your journey, it made perfect sense. But that required, like for me, it required so much mental discipline to shut out that noise, to do the background research, even go on LinkedIn and find people whose job I wanted. What did they do? Is there any similarities? But I find that mental discipline of matching what I think I'd done with the people that I admired, that was just so much work involved. So for you, how did you maintain that level of discipline and shut out that noise? Is it about just getting rid of people that give you bad energy? Is it about, like, I don't know, some kind of mental exercise? Like, how did you do it?
Oh boy, I mean that's a big question. I will say, on the meta level, on the big picture level, what gets any human being through a challenge that requires discipline is a sense of purpose. And that's a very philosophical question that I could go on for hours, and I'll try not to.
Good. But what helped you in your journey?
Yeah, so for me, it was a mix of purpose and curiosity. And it was reading, it was a blog post specifically. The reason I made a spreadsheet with 200 startups was based on a blog post I discovered by a really funny venture capitalist, and his Twitter handle was StartupLJackson, kind of like Samuel L. Jackson from Pulp Fiction. And he wrote a blog post saying, if you want a job at a startup, research 200 of them, pick the top 50 that interest you, and interview at 10. And I remember I got mad when I first read it. Like, oh, like I can just interview. Like I can just knock on the door and get an interview. Like they're going to tell me, you know, turn around, bucko, you're not getting one. And so then I realized that I needed to overcome my cynicism and give it a shot. So that's why I knew I could research 200 startups. I knew I could turn that into 50 that seemed interesting. I knew I could turn that into the top 10. Then the challenge for me was, how do I actually talk to the top 10? And that's where the networking came in. So, curiosity is not the same as passion, and follow your passion is rarely useful advice. But if you're open-minded to opportunities out there and you're not stuck on one, that can also be an advantage, because you can find clusters of industries that interest you. And if you have time and bandwidth and the financial resources, you can take some time to learn about each one. So I would let people's curiosity and their sense of purpose drive them. And purpose could be everything from the practical to, I have a family and I need to pay the bills within 3 months when money runs out, to more philosophical, to like, I want to eradicate the effects of hormones on produce. So I'm looking for an organic produce type startup working in agricultural tech. So purpose can be very practical to paying the bills, to something that has meaning to you philosophically. But you need to reflect on that purpose continuously in order to keep up that level of discipline required for the search. Yeah,
that's phenomenal. I think the steps that you walk people through so far, it's really spot on. It's great. How about some things that lessons learned for yourself? What are some of things that doesn't work for you, or you feel like even for anyone as they transition their careers?
One that I alluded to earlier is never, unless you have a very thick skin and you don't mind rejection, I would never apply to a company cold on the internet without talking to at least one person in that industry, one person with that job title, and one person at that company, because you're going to learn each company processes applications different, and none of them tell you how they do it. Some people use software screening devices. Some people it's the hiring manager. Some people it's the recruiter. Some people it's a team, and you don't know. So you don't know the best strategy for getting into a company until you talk to people, and they can help you dial down the granularity of that process. And some people are going to say, well, that requires a lot of work. My thoughts are, if you take 4 or 5 hours to do that, your response rate is going to be 40 to 50 times as much as if you just entered the black hole of death. So it's a 10% investment on the front end for 100% return and response rate on the back, something like that. So what doesn't work is applying cold, in my experience. Also, what doesn't is people look for companies that interest them. Like, say I'm interested in learning about the Internet of Things and connected devices. What doesn't work is applying for a company like that because you want to learn something. Now, of course you should learn something. And if you want to learn something, that is awesome. And you should absolutely get as much as you give from a company. But when you're applying for a company, you need to make it clear how you can add value and contribute to the company. It's just like going on a date. If you know someone who's fun and exciting and cool, it's perfectly normal and natural and healthy to want to date them because of everything they have to offer. But you're not going to get their attention or impress them if you don't make it immediately clear what you have to offer. You yourself need to be interesting and fun and smart and put together so that both of you create a mutually beneficial relationship. It's the same thing when applying to a company. So when people switch industries and they want to learn about something new, they absolutely will and should learn from that experience, but they need to market themselves in a way where they're adding value to it. And the easiest way to do that is do research on the internet about what that industry does. I have story after story of people I met. I have a friend who knew nothing about blockchain. She discovered it in 2013. She spent 3 weeks learning everything she could on the internet, drove to San Francisco and wouldn't leave Coinbase alone until they hired her, and they hired her. And she came from oil and gas, and look how well they're doing now.
Yeah.
The reason that's relevant is in oil and gas, you're going to learn a lot of skills that are relevant to a startup: project management, cross-functional teams, organization. But it's still going to be hard to convince someone to hire you from oil and gas unless you do something a little bit outside the box, like spending 3 weeks to learn everything you can. And then once you've done that and you show that you're fanatical and you have deep insights you can apply immediately, they're going to say, you've earned your chops in a different industry that's maybe not immediately relevant. But we see that you've worked hard. We see that you've obsessed about this thing we obsess about. You are worth taking a risk on. Mm-hmm. So I guess I didn't mean to ramble a little bit. If someone is switching industries and there's something that interests them about this really different industry, kind of keep it quiet, all the stuff you want to learn, and be very loud about everything you have to contribute.
Very good. Wow, I'm so glad you and I spoke. Now, for people who, if they just want to get some advice from you or use your services, how do they get a hold of you?
I need a website here soon. Probably email is best. I'm happy to connect with anyone. My email address is hesch.adam@gmail.com. hesch.adam@gmail.com. It's spelled weird. hesch.adam@gmail.com.
Good. I'm going to make sure that I put that in the show note as well so people can easily get a hold of you.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. I'm glad I could be helpful. Wish everyone all the best of luck in the job search. It causes a lot of anxiety, so keep your mental health under control and go forth and do awesome things.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Helen.